Today, we're digging into one of the most intense and controversial chapters in modern Indian history, the emergency of 1975. It's a gripping story about just how fragile a democracy can be and what happens when power goes unchecked. I mean, just think about this for a second. It all came down to one signature. On the night of June 25th, 1975, a single proclamation was signed. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen, the democratic rights of over 600 million people were just suspended indefinitely.
In the change, it was immediate. It was absolute. Before the sun even came up, opposition leaders, journalists, activists, they were being woken up and hauled off to jail. The power to newspaper printing presses, cut. And fundamental rights, the very bedrock of the Constitution, they basically just vanished. This was the beginning of a 21-month period that many would call the darkest hour of Indian democracy.
So the big question is, how on earth could this happen in a thriving democracy? This wasn't a military coup or anything like that. No, this was all done using the Constitution. The answer is, well, it's complicated. It's a perfect storm of a huge political clash, total economic chaos, and one shocking court case that pushed the entire nation right to the edge. You see, the power to do this was already written right into India's constitution. It's called Article 352, and it allows for a national emergency. But here's the thing. It was designed for truly existential threats, things like war or a violent armed rebellion, not for shutting down political protests. And this is where it gets really interesting. See, India had declared an emergency before, back in 62 and 71, during wars with China and Pakistan. But the reason then was external aggression. That makes sense. The 1975 emergency, though, was declared for a much, much fuzzier reason, internal disturbance. And that difference is absolutely crucial. For the first time, these massive emergency powers were turned inward, aimed directly at the lives and freedoms of ordinary Indian citizens. So to really get why this happened, we've got to start with this epic power struggle. It was between one of India's most powerful leaders, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and the one institution that could actually stand in her way, the judiciary. When Indira Gandhi first became prime minister way back in 1966, the political old guard just didn't take her seriously at all. One opposition leader famously called her a gunji gudiya, which means a dumb doll, basically a puppet for the senior party bosses. Everyone thought she was weak, someone they could control. Oh, but they had completely, and I mean completely, underestimated her. With a few incredibly bold and popular moves, she just shattered that image. She nationalized the biggest banks, she took on the old royal families by getting rid of their state pensions, the privy purses, and then she led India to a massive military victory over Pakistan. The dumb doll was now, without a doubt, the most dominant leader in the country. But these bold moves put her on a direct collision course with the courts. When her government took over the big banks, the Supreme Court said, "Nope, you can't do that," and struck the law down. So what was her response? Did she back down? Not a chance. She doubled down. She used her massive majority in parliament to literally amend the Constitution, basically putting her government's power above the Supreme Court's. And we saw the exact same pattern play out when she went after the royal pensions. A law fails, an executive order gets shot down by the courts, so what does she do? She goes back to her ultimate weapon, another constitutional amendment. You can see the strategy here, right? If the rules get in your way, just use your power to rewrite the rule book. This whole showdown came to a head in 1973. In a famous case called Kesavananda Bharathi, the Supreme Court finally drew a line in the sand. They ruled that yes, Parliament can amend the Constitution, but it cannot change its basic structure. Things like, democracy, fundamental rights, the rule of law, the very soul of the Constitution were now off limits. This was a direct challenge to the Prime Minister's power, and it just made that rift between the government and the judiciary even deeper. Now, while all of this political drama was unfolding, the country was getting hammered by a brutal economic crisis. And this created a whole lot of public anger that was about to explode onto the streets. Let's just look at this recipe for disaster. The 1971 war was incredibly expensive. Millions of refugees were pouring in from Bangladesh, straining every resource. Then, boom, the 1973 global oil crisis hits, and prices go through the roof. On top of all that, the monsoons failed, which destroyed crops. What do you get when you mix all that together? You get skyrocketing inflation, massive unemployment, and just widespread hardship for millions of people. And all that economic pain?
it lit a fire of protest across the country. It started with students in Gujarat marching against high food prices. But that movement, called Nav Nirman, grew so big it actually forced the state government to resign. Seeing that success, a respected leader, Jayaprakash Narayan, or JP, launched a huge anti-corruption movement in another state, Bihar. And then, a massive railway strike with almost 2 million workers brought the entire country to a grinding halt. A tidal wave of dissent was washing over India. So you've got this explosive mix of political conflict and social unrest. It was a tinderbox just waiting for a spark. And in June of 1975, a single court verdict lit the match. So her main opponent from the 1971 election had filed a lawsuit against her, accusing her of cheating. Now, the Allahabad High Court actually cleared her of the really serious stuff, like bribery. But it found her guilty on 2 smaller counts of misusing government staff and resources for her campaign. The sentence, though, was a political earthquake. The court declared her election invalid. It stripped her of her seat in parliament and barred her from holding any elected office for 6 years. I mean, this was unbelievable. The sitting Prime Minister of India had just been kicked out of office by a court. The opposition, led by JP Narayan, jumped on this. At a huge rally in Delhi, he roared a line from a famous poem, "Vacate the throne, for the people are coming." He called for a nationwide total revolution and even asked the police and the army not to obey what he called the government's illegal orders. Now, to the government, this sounded a lot like a call for rebellion. So there she was, cornered by the courts, challenged on the streets, and facing the very real possibility of losing all her power. Indira Gandhi made her final, drastic move. On that night, June 25th, she went to the president and advised him to declare a national emergency. The justification? Those protests were a threat to national security, an internal disturbance. He signed the order, and just like that, the trap was sprung. What came next was a 21-month nightmare for democracy. Over 100,000 people, political opponents, activists, were thrown in jail with no trial. The press was muzzled completely. Some newspapers famously just printed blank pages where their editorials should have been. But it got even worse. Controversial programs were rolled out with brutal force, like a mass sterilization campaign and the demolition of slums in Delhi, both pushed by her son, Sanjay Gandhi. And then, in a move that still baffles historians, in early 1977, Indira Gandhi suddenly called for elections and released all the political prisoners. The result? A complete and total rejection of her rule. Her Congress party was crushed in a historic defeat, and for the first time since India's independence, a non-Congress government took over. The people had spoken, and their verdict on the emergency was crystal clear. The emergency finally ended, and democracy was back. But it left a deep scar and a really haunting question, not just for India, but for every democracy out there. In the name of order and stability, how much freedom is too much to give up? And more importantly, who gets to make that decision?